Hey everyone, my name is Nick. Welcome to the Lotus Archives. I am here today with Jack.
Hello, everybody. How we doing today? Doing good, brother?
Oh, always got a coffee in my hand, sitting about to talk Magic the Gathering.
Hell yeah. So today we are actually going over the main three archetypes in Commander and just Magic the Gathering in general. Going over the basically like the core triangle of the group here. You know, you got your combo, your control, and your aggro strategies. And we're gonna just be taking today, going over each of these guys and kind of how they're like the rock paper scissors to Magic the Gathering. You know, each one kind of has a way up above the other ones, so to speak. So, Nick, I'm gonna pass it over to you to dive into aggro. What you
All
got?
right. So, aggro is probably the simplest form to play of Magic. Aggro is short for aggressive, focused on dealing a bunch of damage as quickly as possible. And the whole point of the deck is get your opponent's life total to zero is the main goal. There's obviously various other ways an aggro deck can win with poison counters, infect counters, all the other BS ways that some people look at as cheesy ways to win. If you're looking at aggro, you could really have an aggro deck in any color. Um, Probably the most famous aggro style deck would be a mono red goblins with a commander such as like Krenko. Um, but one of my personal favorite aggro decks that I've played is a little bit different, and it is Yasova Dragonclaw. Yasova is a green, blue, red creature, and she has trample. And her card reads at the beginning of combat on your turn, you may pay one blue, red, blue, red. If you do, gain control of target creature an opponent controls with power less than Yasova Dragonclaw's power until the end of turn. Untap that creature and it gains haste until the end of turn. Now, when you're looking at that, you're going to ask, well, how is that aggro? Well, I'm going to be stealing all my opponent's creatures and fighting that person back. So you're going to need a lot of cards like Mod Rule, Active Aggression. You're going to need cards like Fling. And what Fling does is essentially you sacrifice a creature and it can deal damage to an opponent. And a good card for Yasova style deck would be a card like Conjurer's Closet. Now, Conjurer's Closet reads at the beginning of your end step, you may exile target creature you control, then return that card to the battlefield under your control. So that gets around cards like Act of Treason, which reads gain control of target creature until end of turn, untap that creature, it gains haste until end of turn. It gets around having to give that creature back. Now, Conjurer's Closet could be a very, very mean card, but at the end of the day, there's ways to get around someone stealing your card and getting it back. And we'll talk more about that much later. With a Yasova style deck, if I'm looking at this and I'm trying to teach someone how to play my version of the deck, you're essentially going to use Yasova's Act of Treason ability on a stick and other steal effects to steal other people's creatures. And then you can use flicker based things like Conjurer's Closet to permanently steal those creatures. You want to make sure you have plenty of sack outlets, get that mana, get the ability to ping your opponent for damage. And you also want to make sure you have enough equipment in your deck so you can bump Yasova up so you can use her ability to steal even larger creatures.
So, like the main strategy then that you're going for is basically kind of like a go wide with your opponent's creatures and win through just sheer damage or even commander damage per se.
Exactly. You're just building a big of an army as you can by stealing your opponent's creatures here. It's fairly straightforward. Um, it's definitely not going to be a deck that everyone enjoys playing because you could be going up against a pure combo deck that might only have one creature, and this deck isn't going to do jack shit.
It can be tough in situations like that, yeah, especially when we're dealing with combo decks.
So, another deck that I've recently been able to play a little bit here, and this is a little bit different from your traditional style aggro of either going wide or going big. Um, it's Finn the Fangbearer. So, Finn is, well, one in a green, legendary creature, human warrior. He is a 1/3 Death Touch, and he reads whenever a creature you control with Death Touch deals combat damage to a player, that player gets 2 poison counters. A player with 10 or more poison counters loses the game.
I love the sound of that.
Yeah. Finn is very mean, and he was from the recent set Kaldheim. And with Finn, the way you want to play this is you want to go for as many low CMC creatures as you can that have Death Touch. So you're going to have cards like Ambush Viper, which is a 1 green with Flash and Death Touch for a 2/1. You got cards like Moss Viper, a 1 green 1/1 with Death Touch. Then you got cards like Eager Basilisk, which is a 2 green 1/3 with Death Touch, and he has Toxic 1. And you have other cards that can kind of boost up those poison counters. So you got cards like Smell Fear, which is a 1 green sorcery for that has Proliferate. Target creature you control fights up to one target creature you don't control. Now, for those that don't know, Proliferate, choose any number of permanents and or players, then give each another counter of each kind that already had there. Yeah, that works for poison counters, everyone.
Oh, yes.
So you got cards again like Unnatural Restoration that has Proliferate on it, and that you can return a card to your from your graveyard to your hand on it. And there's many cards that are going to be able to help boost Finn's ability to give everyone poison counters. Um, the biggest thing is you want most of your creatures all to have Death Touch, because without Death Touch, they don't get poison counters with Finn. And the big thing with Finn, you want to make sure you're able to protect him at all costs. As soon as he hits that board, people are going to be trying to get rid of him.
Yeah, he gets a big target on his back for sure.
Yeah, he is definitely not a nice commander. I personally hate playing against him, and I'm sure Jack feels the same way
I
because,
mean, he's in my infect deck, so I mean,
yeah, unfortunately, it's very, very tough if you don't have um, any ways to handle him.
aggro strategies definitely have their pros and their cons, right? Like, so I think definitely went over some really good stuff with those. I know like some of the aggro decks that I've played, like the creature heavy, want to swing, want to deal damage. They're usually very fast, very quick. But board wipes, man, board wipes are the biggest threat I think that we face with aggro decks,
Yeah,
especially if they're focused on creatures.
but aggro is definitely a trickier. It's a very simple way to play the game.
Yeah, I think like if you compare it to the other ones, if somebody was just getting into Magic, I would probably recommend them to go with an aggro style strategy. So like, just here's the 40 life total that we all start with. Bring that to 0. That's how you win the game.
Exactly.
Like if I'm teaching somebody new, I'd be like, okay, here's a deck with basic creatures like a bear deck. Like we have the Ayula who just makes bears and wants bears in play. Go play bears, put a bunch of bears into play, swing, turn them sideways, attack with them. That's your strategy.
Exactly. And aggro, you can always make it Aggro is one of those decks where you could have a control deck, but have a sub theme of a little bit of aggro in
Right.
there, or you can have a combo deck, knowing okay, if my combos aren't getting drawn, I'm gonna just start trying to beat them down. You always got to have a way
Yep.
to win, because if you're playing a deck and you don't have a way to win, what's the
Yeah.
point? Unless you're playing a deck like Group Hug, which even Group Hugs style decks, they have a way to win.
Oh yeah.
Some people just might not like to use it, and they just like messing with the battlefield.
I definitely see my fair share of those.
Oh, exactly. So now, Jack, your specialty that I've known you for years now, and you've always been the resident combo player. I personally don't like playing combo just because I don't have as much fun with it. But I'm gonna let you talk about combo decks a little bit here.
That's fair.
Um, Now, combo decks. What exactly
Yes.
is a combo deck?
So ever since I've been playing Magic for the longest time, I've always loved the synergies between cards. And a combo deck is basically centered around finding the right pieces, right? If anyone's ever played Yu-Gi-Oh, I know a lot of us who have, go on to Magic, we start with Yu-Gi-Oh. It's basically assembling Exodia. It's trying to find the right pieces to a puzzle or pieces to a machine, and once they come together, you basically have a huge explosion of value, pretty much. So a lot of the decks that I've played that revolve around combos typically tend to be artifact decks. Basically, you're trying to find these pieces, and as soon as they come together, you can basically make infinite mana, you can make infinite draw, infinite creatures, infinite damage, life gain. It basically lets you form a loop where you do the same thing over and over again to get the win. Uh, so yeah, so my a lot of like I think combos don't even have to typically be in that sense because there was a deck I used to play called Storm where you'd basically have a huge turn of playing a bunch of spells to get a bunch of mana, and those were considered combo decks back in my legacy days because you'd basically string together a bunch of cards in a rapid order in succession to then have one spell that blew up and had this big effect with the storm mechanic, which was basically if a card had storm, you would copy it for each spell you played before it. So if you're playing, say, 5 to 10, spells that give you free mana, and then you play your big storm spell, you copy that about 5 to 10 times, which usually would end up winning you the game in a format like Legacy when it's only 60 cards and you're only at 20 life, as opposed to Commander's 40 life total. Now, the one commander that I've always kind of enjoyed playing the most here, as I mentioned, was Artifacts, and the best one I have found, that I'm sure any commander veteran will tell you, is Brea Ethereum Shaper. And she was released back in the one of the early commander sets from a couple years back, where they introduced the four-color commanders for the first time. Brea is the white, blue, black, red commander. She's a legendary artifact human with when she enters the battlefield, you make 2 blue Thopter tokens with flying. She also has an activated ability of pay 2 colorless, sack 2 artifacts, and you can choose one of the following abilities. Either she will deal 3 damage to a target player or planeswalker, you can give a creature -4/-4 until end of turn, or you can gain 5 life. Now, it's important to note that -4/-4, it gets around the indestructible mechanic, which basically makes a creature immune to damage. If you reduce its toughness to 0, it'll still die even if it's indestructible, which is always fun. We love to see that.
Yeah, that's certainly not too fun to play against when you're trying to remove something.
Yeah, yeah, and like even so, like combos don't even have to be artifacts; they can be in any other deck too. And I pretty much, the way I love combos is I put various combo style, like combination of cards, in pretty much all of my decks. So with Bray in specific, you have 3 card or 2 card combos that can basically net you an infinite amount of something, right? So One big one is a combination of Sword of the Meek, Thopter Foundry, and Card Clan Ironworks. So what these all do is basically Sword of the Meek is a equipment that, if it's in the graveyard, as soon as you have a 1/1 creature come into play, Sword of the Meek will come back into play from the graveyard and attach itself to that creature. And then Thopter Foundry is you sack an artifact, make a 1/1 Thopter. We combine that with a card like Card Clan Ironworks, where sack an artifact, make 2 colorless mana, and you form this loop of being able to just continuously make artifact like Thopter tokens, getting that sword back, sacrificing the sword, making a Thopter, getting the sword back, making a Thopter, and then you end up sacrificing the Thopters to make mana to continuously do this thing
See, to me,
over and
that
over
sounds
again.
super complex and a lot more than what my brain can normally handle. What type of player likes playing combo decks like that?
So I'd say those of us that enjoy the combo decks are kind of those of the mind that like to see kind of the strings or lines come together almost like in a circuit board, like you look at a circuit and you see all the lines come together to form this thing. I always look at it, and this is probably why I love the artifact style so much, because I look at it like a big machine where you're just assembling all the parts and various pieces, and you basically become Tony Stark. When you're trying to build these crazy like mechanisms that do all these crazy things all at once, which I love. And they've always appealed to me as like kind of just this instant win button, which I've always preferred to other means. It's like, oh, I get these cards out, okay, I just win. Now that's not to say that that's all I do. I have other means of win, but that's what a combo deck does. Essentially, a combo deck really just wants to get these pieces out that result in an instant win. One other one I was going to note here was the Machias and Walking Ballista combo. So Machias the Unhallowed. Let me see. He's one that actually has a lot of other stuff to him. So he's a legendary zombie cleric. He's 3 colorless, 3 black. He has Intimidate. Whenever a human deals damage to you, destroy it. Those parts don't really matter too much. What really matters is that his final ability gives other non-human creatures you control +1/+1 and have Undying. So Undying is that if a creature had no 1/1 counters on it, you return to the battlefield under its owner's control with a 1/1 counter on it. And we combine this with a card like Walking Ballista, which is a lovely artifact creature with it's got a 2x mana cost, which basically means you have to pay 2 times X. So like if you pay 2 mana into it, it comes in with a number of counters equal to X. So if you put 2 into it, it comes with 1. You put 4 into it, it comes in with 2. Things like that. You can pay 4 mana to put a 1/1 counter on Walking Ballista, or its final ability, which is what lets you win the game, is you remove a 1/1 counter from the Walking Ballista, and it deals the damage to any target. We combine this with Machias because once you take away the counters from this card, he then goes back to the graveyard, triggers Machias' Undying, it comes back as a 1/1 with that Undying counter on it. You remove the Undying counter, and you just repeatedly keep pinging your opponents for 1 over and over again as this card goes
So
back and
now,
comes back.
speaking as a competitive standpoint, how the hell do you combat that?
Yes. Well, counter spells are typically the best way to go. The biggest con, or like the biggest weakness, yeah, to a combo deck is if one of the pieces that we play gets removed or exiled or destroyed, that is kind of it for the combo deck. So a lot of combo players will usually tend to run forms of protection to keep their pieces safe. And, we'll add some forms of like counter spells or ways to give hexproof or shroud, like ways to like kind of protect ourselves, basically. Ways to make it so that the pieces can't be interrupted. We'll make them indestructible in some way. I know when it comes to this combo I just mentioned, the Machias and Walking Ballista, I play it in a graveyard center deck where my whole goal is to get these two pieces into the graveyard and then I reanimate them in some way, shape, or form. Which makes it really tough because it's always in Magic. It's always kind of trickier to interact with somebody's graveyard. There's plenty of ways to exile the graveyard for sure, but in Commander, most decks are so fine tuned that they tend not to run much graveyard interaction just on a whim. And most people aren't running the card like Tormod's Crypt, which is a 0 drop. You tap it, you exile somebody's graveyard. I haven't really seen too many Commander decks running that card just because.
So what you're saying is, if one of our listeners has a play group and there is a combo centric player, you're pretty much saying if you're not running any removal or any counter spells, you're probably going to lose.
You're definitely going to want to run targeted removal, have some form of counter spells if you can. Um, the one big thing to note though is that for combo decks, they tend to be kind of slow. Unless the combo player can get off what we call our tutors. So we have things like demonic tutor, diabolic tutor, which basically all they do is they just let you search your deck for a card. So us big combo players, we like to try to search out our pieces as quickly as possible. But say for like an aggro strategy, and this is where we come into like the rock paper scissors style of it, is that an aggro deck can actually do pretty well against a combo player if they can be fast enough and hit them as quickly as possible. Like say, I know, like you mentioned the goblin aggro deck, right, with Krenko Mob Boss, who
Oh, of
just taps and
course.
makes a bunch of goblins. If you're doing say like a 1v1 strategy where it's like, or it's just you and one other person, and you know that your opponent's playing a combo deck when you have aggro, you're going to want to go as hard as possible to just beat their face in with your aggro deck and kind of just keep them from being able to even do anything at all. Which I've had that happen. I've played a combo deck in a 1v1 setting and I've lost multiple times because my opponent was just able to beat me down before I could get my combo off. Doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes the combo deck is
I
fast,
mean,
but
yeah, why should we allow the combo player to have any fun?
exactly, yeah. So like if you know what your opponent's up to, if you know their plan, you definitely want to be on the lookout for it. Now in a 4-man group, it can be trickier to do like target acquisition, which we're going to talk about that in a much later episode, I think, about how to pick your target and know what's on the board there. But
Oh, oh, without a doubt, that's going to be a full
oh yeah,
episode worth of
oh
talking.
yeah. But as far as the combo strategy goes, that's pretty much the general gist of it. Is just really trying to assemble those pieces, and basically what we say is like pop off. Pretty much, you're gonna go off with all these crazy things, and you want to really make sure you know the synergy of these cards and how they work together. It's pretty much all what it comes down to.
Hmm. Okay, that's very interesting. I know combo definitely isn't for everybody, but it is certainly
No, it's a niche mine.
it's a very viable thing to try and play. Mostly
Oh
because
yes.
a lot of people don't understand the nuances of a true combo deck. At least from what I've seen. I know me personally, if I wanted to play a combo deck, I know I could. I've just never had an
Oh yeah.
interest in building a combo deck myself.
I mean, it probably wouldn't even. I mean, you could even run simple combos in other decks too. So, like an elf deck that I play, I have a couple pieces in there that would allow me to get, say, infinite mana.
Okay.
Is it a necessary core piece of the deck? No. Does it help? Absolutely. So, you can run little bits here and there of like, oh, if I get this, it's great, but if not, it's no big deal. So I wouldn't even, I would recommend, for any more like, once you've got some experience and you see how a deck is playing and you do some research, you look up, oh, what are some cool combos that could get me infinite draw or infinite mana just so I could do this really cool thing in my play group just to try it out. Absolutely go for that. Otherwise, yeah, you can basically just mess around with it. It's like a puzzle. You're putting all these pieces together to see what happens.
All right. So what do we have next? What's that last form of typical playing?
So yeah, so that then brings us to control, which control decks are they're very unique. They're a fun strategy and they can kind of help counteract what the other two try to do. Essentially, the control deck really wants to control the board. Really, they want to be in the pilot seat. They want to be driving the train. They want to be guiding where the game is going. So they would use a lot of stuff like just counter spells that can stop something from resolving. A lot of like resource denial cards that are out there. Like there's a 2 black sorcery called Sinkhole, which just makes your opponent sacrifice a land, which is always fun.
No, that doesn't sound fun at all.
Control can it's definitely not a bad way to play the game. It can leave a bad taste in some players' mouths for sure. Just because, like, who wants to have their spells constantly countered or their lands destroyed? Which, side note, that's a golden rule in Commander. Don't mess with people's lands. Don't play cards like Armageddon that blow up all lands. Just don't do it.
Unless you want to be a dick. Sometimes being a dick is fun,
I
especially
mean,
when someone deserves it. They're talking a bunch of crap, think they're hot shit. Oh, you bet your ass I'm pulling out my land destruction deck.
just know that if you play Armageddon unprompted, you will be targeted for sure.
Oh, without a doubt. And most times, if you play a card like that, or you start doing land destruction style mechanics, and it's not warranted, meaning someone doesn't deserve it, or they don't think they deserve it, the entire table will be going after you,
Yep.
whether it's that same game or 3 games later. They're still going to go after you because they're still salty that you stopped them from playing the game.
Some players would. I definitely have met a few years ago that hold on to those grudges. But so
Whether
that's
they're warranted
just
or not, it happens, and it's something to
yeah.
be aware of.
So let's see. Yeah, so those are some forms of control that I've encountered. What other control aspects do you have in mind there, Nick?
Well, we talked about it last episode. Probably my favorite form of control is going to be the almighty stacks. Did
Yes.
you want to play a game of Magic?
Better pay for it.
Well, too bad, because only I'm playing. Well, stacks, it's. How do I say it nicely? You are a degenerate if you play stacks. um, Now, me personally, I love my stacks decks. We talked about it briefly last episode on my Airtie stacks deck. But today I'm going to be talking about something a little bit simpler that someone just getting into the game can learn how to play. So, we had this mighty card from the early days of Commander in 2013. His name was Oloro, Ageless Ascetic. Now, Oloro is 3 in Esper for a legendary creature, Giant Soldier. He is a 4/5. At the beginning of your upkeep, you gain 2 life. Whenever you gain life, you may pay 1. If you do, draw a card and each opponent loses 1 life. At the beginning of your upkeep, if Oloro Ageless Ascetic is in the command zone, you gain 2 life. Now, Jack, that sounds mighty similar to some of these more recent cards that have come out for Commander.
Yes, it's
It
basically like OG Eminence, pretty much. And he was the first one we ever had for that.
Now, for those that don't know, Eminence was this amazing ability that gave commanders something to do when they're not on the battlefield, essentially. You got cards like Edgar Markov, you got cards like Arabo, Roar of the Wilds, for those cat lovers out there. And pretty much they allowed you to do shit while your commander wasn't out. Now, a card like Aloro, he is the OG of this ability. This was before Eminence was even a thing.
It's about 4 years prior.
Yeah,
Yeah, we had those like the Vampire Tribal, Dragon Tribal, Cat Tribal, those kind of decks. They didn't come out till 2017. So it was
yeah,
4 years before they were like, oh hey, that Oloro guy, let's make his thing actually a mechanic.
yeah. And for those that have been following around for a long time now, they quickly realized they went too far with Eminence. And Edgar Markov is the prime example,
Yeah.
as you can't even play him in 1v1 anymore, as he's banned in tournaments for 1v1 play.
Yep. What's it called? That's the French one. They call that as he's banned in French. That's the like their actual title for it, which is wild. It didn't even take long for them to ban him either with that. I think it was
No.
maybe 3 months or so after he was released that they started seeing, oh, he just nobody ever just plays him. They just keep him in the command zone and drop a bunch of vampires.
Oh, exactly. It was disgusting.
Yep.
But
Very powerful.
with this Loro build, essentially all you're going to want to do is you're going to want to pillow fort yourself. So you're going to want to get a bunch of cards that are pretty much telling you that opponents can't do anything to you unless they pay to or unless they do something, sack a creature. There's plenty of cards out there that will do that. I'm not going to go too deep into all of them,
Well, so like,
but
what would be the main three? Like, I know there's three enchantments that I think we've talked about before that
yeah.
go into like that. Don't touch me. I'm safe in my pillow fort. What would be those? What would be those three?
So, of course, I didn't have these all written up, but one of the big ones is going to be Ghostly Prison.
Yep,
So,
Ghostly Prison
Ghostly
for sure.
Prison is a 2 and a white. Creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 for each creature he or she controls that's attacking you. That is a huge card that is going to stop people from attacking you.
Yep, it's got its blue counterpart as well in Propaganda, which essentially does the same thing. It's just two in a blue, and it does exactly what Ghostly Prison does.
Oh, exactly. And then you got cards like Authority of the Consoles,
Yep,
which is a white card. Creatures opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, you gain 1 life. That's another way to gain more life.
absolutely. Which, if you happen to have Oloro in play, which you wouldn't always have to have him in play, but if you happen to, you can use his other ability to just draw cards and make your opponents lose more life.
Precisely. And with the whole life thing, there is this lovely combo that you can do that if you're playing Oloro, I highly recommend if you can find these cards to put them in this deck. You have Sanguine Bond and Exquisite Blood. Sanguine Bond is a 3 black enchantment. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. And then you got Exquisite Blood, which is 4 and a black enchantment. Whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life. So if you think about that, yeah, your opponent's dead. That's going to combo together very, very well. Exquisite Blood right now is a little on the pricier side. It's coming in at just over $20. But if you're really looking to get into a more competitive style deck, I highly recommend you making sure you save up some cash and put that card in there.
Yeah, those two are just an instant win button, pretty much.
So, with a stack style deck and a control style deck, you can't just be an asshole and stop everyone else from playing the game. You have to make sure you have a way to win.
Yeah.
Well, with a Loro, and more specifically a life gain style deck, there's a few different style cards that you can do. The first one, which is very, very easy in a game of Commander, you got Feldar Sovereign. He is 4 a white and a white for a 4/6 creature, cat beast. He has vigilance and lifelink. And he reads at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have 40 or more life, you win the game. Now, Jack, how much life do you start with in Commander?
You start with 40.
Yeah, so as long as you have no damage taken to you and he's out on the board your next turn, you win.
That's going to be the trick, though, is keeping that little guy around for a whole turn cycle. Especially if you're playing in a 4 pod, like a typical 4-person game. Keeping that little guy around, that's going to be the biggest challenge that you'll face.
So, Jack, how would you suggest someone attempts to keep him around?
Oh boy. Probably the best option, which you'll see in pretty much any deck these days, which is what we would call the staple card. Or there's two of them. There's one called Swiftfoot Boots, which is a 2 colorless equipment that you can equip it for 1, gives a creature haste and hexproof, which hexproof means it can't be targeted by your opponent's spells or effects. So that's one pretty good way of protecting him. That's pretty cheap. The other being Lightning Greaves, which does almost the same thing. It's 2 mana, right? It's an artifact equipment, so it's 2 colorless. You play it. It's free to equip, and it gives haste and shroud, which shroud is kind of that earlier form of hexproof, which protects it from everything. So it basically means that your opponents can't target it, you can't target it. It just can't be, hit by pretty much anything aside from like unless someone's dropping a board wipe to wipe out all creatures, or yeah, they would have to basically do a massive board wipe to get rid of it because it couldn't be targeted by a removal spell.
Yeah, so that's going to be definitely a tricky one to make sure you stay on the battlefield.
Yep.
But then you also have another way to win here with Aloro. And a great card from almost 10 years ago now. It's a colorless 4-drop artifact, and it goes by the name of Aetherflux Reservoir. It
Oh yeah.
reads whenever you cast a spell, you gain 1 life for each spell you've cast this turn. But that's not what I care about. I care about the second part here. Pay 50 life. Aetherflux Reservoir deals 50 damage to target creature or player. Um, yeah, I'm pretty sure we just said 40 life is starting total.
Yep.
So,
That's the big death ray laser right there.
yeah, so I win the game. But, so along that, you got plenty of ways that you can win the game in a life
Yeah.
gain style deck. And I tend to make my Loro deck somewhat of a combination between aggro and stacks. I want to pump up all of my creatures, go wide, and you got cards that can help you do that a little bit more. And you can really start leaning into like all the different various angels cards that are out there. There is a lot of great cards from some more recent sets as well that can help with the Oloro style deck. I mean, you got cards like Asterion, the Decadent. He is a 4 white black vampire elf rogue 4/4 with Death Touch and Lifelink. And he reads at the beginning of your end step, choose 1. Feed. Target opponent loses life equal to the amount of life they lost this turn. Or friends. You gain life equal to the amount of life you gain this turn. So that could potentially be another way to help you gain life in an Oloro style deck. And you can do a lot of things, and you want to be able to protect some of your enchantments that you have with Oloro here for your stacks based stuff. And John, what are some cards that our viewers can use to help protect their enchantments or bring them back from the graveyard?
So enchantment recursion is pretty niche. You've got things like Brilliant Restoration, which is kind of newer. It's from the Neon Dynasty Kamigawa set. It is 3 and I want to say 4 white. Let me double check on that. Yeah, 3 colorless and 4 white, so it's 7 mana. And it's a sorcery, so it simply states return all artifact and enchantment cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is one of those big ones, which is really great. Though if 7 mana is too much for you, we also have an option like Open the Vaults, which is 3 and 2 white, so it's a 5 mana. And the only difference between this one and Brilliant Restoration, though, is that Open the Vaults will bring back everything for everybody. So it's kind of one that I would only use if, say, you had the win kind of right then and there. Like, say you had, your Exquisite Blood and Sanguine Bond combo in the graveyard. Then I would probably use Open the Vaults just to bring those back right away and try to win the game instantly. But that's where, like, my cheeky combo brain kind of goes and takes it. It's just like, oh, I have this instant win button in my graveyard. Let me play this one. It doesn't matter that it brings everything else back for everybody else, like Open the Vaults. As long as I get my instant win button combo, then that's all that would matter for that one.
So, with enchantments, you want to make sure you protect them. And with enchantments, a lot of them happen on your upkeep. Oloro's ability happens on your upkeep. And there's this one nifty card that is 2 and a blue for an enchantment aura. And it's a player enchantment. And you might want this card in your deck if you have a lot of cards that rely on your upkeep. And this card goes by the name of Paradox Haze. And it reads Enchant Player. At the beginning of enchanted player's first upkeep each turn, that player gets an additional upkeep step after this step. So that is pretty crazy because you're going to start being able to double everything. Now, Jack, what exactly can you do on your upkeep? Can you start just randomly throwing shit up there, put more lands out into play and all that?
No, so your upkeep is like the turn order is basically you untap your lands, upkeep triggers happen, draw phase, battle phase, main phase 2, end phase. So it's untap. So you have your lands available to you. So you can't play any lands during your upkeep. However, you can play instants or anything that has instant speed effects. So you are able to do some things on your upkeep, and you can even like respond to upkeep triggers, which are basically any kind of permanent on the field that says at the beginning of your upkeep, do this. So since you
Okay.
are able to untap previously to that, if you have something in your hand, like say something gives you mana, you can then respond and be like, okay, well now I have this mana. After that activates, if you have another upkeep trigger, you can respond to that with the mana to drop something out at instant speed.
Huh, that's interesting. So now with a card like Sigarda's Splendor, which is 2 a white and a white enchantment, as Sigarda's Splendor enters the battlefield, note your life total. At the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card if your life total is greater than or equal to the last noted life total for Sigarda's Splendor. Then note your life total. So I'm going to assume if we have a Loro, his upkeep, you gain life. And at that second upkeep step, you automatically can draw another card, if I'm reading this correctly.
So yeah, so the way the upkeep triggers work is that since you're the controlling player, you can stack them in a way that you want. So you can have Oloro's trigger, like Oloro's thing happen first, and then the Sigarda Splendor. where when she ETB, say the previous turn you play her on like your main phase the first turn, and then the turn cycle goes back around again, you reach your second upkeep, you can gain the 2 life, which then puts your life total higher than what it was previously noted as, and you can just keep doing that every single turn.
That is definitely interesting, and I could see that being a fairly powerful tool to use.
Yeah, she's played in quite a few Aloro decks for that reason.
So, Jack, now that we've talked about all these different types of formats, or not formats, but deck
Like the main
archetypes,
archetypes, yeah.
obviously we know yours favorite is combo.
Yep.
I tend to play more control. How do you suggest our viewers figure out what their favorite type is?
So yeah, so like, that's a pretty good way to go. It's one we can segue into is like kind of finding your niche. Like it does take a while. I mean, I know I've been playing for nearly almost 20 years now, and trying to find that style that really goes out to you can be tough. You really just gotta sit down and think about, what do I want my deck to do? What do I want my end goal to be? How do I want to win? And really just what kind of cards do you enjoy playing? I know we talk about how like, oh, control is dastardly and combos can be, hated by the play group, but at the end of the day, it's really just you get to play what you want to, and then you can build around what you like and play what you like, and really just kind of look into what method you want to use. It's like, if do you enjoy making a huge board of creatures and attacking with them, like having your own little army? That's always great. Or do you want to do like what we call a Voltron strategy of, just having one big creature, like say your commander, you can pump him with a bunch of equipment spells which attach to creatures, or auras, which are special enchantments that attach to creatures. You can make your commander really huge and then attack for that. Because in commander, if you're attacking with your commander, you only need to deal 21 damage, right? And
Yeah.
then you can win with commander damage that way. So that's a very viable strategy. So there's all these different ways you can build a deck to win, and like kind of what you want the theme to be, which that actually ties us into the next bit here, which is kind of the difference of a theme versus an archetype, right? So like we've gone over the archetypes of the combo control aggro, but then you kind of have to think about what your theme is. Like, what do you want to actually build around, so to speak? As in, like, some basic examples could be tribal decks, right? Like, tribal deck is a theme that you could go into to pretty much do any one of these core archetypes.
So, what types of themes are there? Like, I know there's tribal.
Yep, tribal is kind of the main one that I would kind of steer most new players to. Like, people that I've tried to teach in the past, or that I have taught how to play this game before, back when I was in college and stuff like that, we'd have people come up and ask us how the game works, and I would typically teach them first with a tribal deck. Like, I would show them one of my tribal decks, which is essentially, you find a creature type that you kind of really enjoy the theme of. Like, you like the style of a creature type, pretty much, which we've got things like elves, dragons, dinosaurs, merfolk, zombies. Let's see. Those are kind of the main big ones. Goblins, right? So like elves, goblins, merfolk, dragons, dinosaurs, zombies. And you would kind of look into that, and you could even, just do some research into it. EDH Rec is a huge help with things like this. You can kind of see which tribes have the most support. I think the big ones being like elves and goblins and merfolk really have a lot of good support alongside dragons and zombies.
I mean, dinosaurs have some great support now too, especially
Dinosaurs are
recently.
getting up there, yes, which is good. And so like each tribe kind of can do its own thing, really. Like the elf deck goes into, just trying to flood the board with creatures, Whereas, say, like a dinosaur deck is kind of going to go along the same side of a dragon deck, which is, you know, their cards are pretty expensive in their mana cost. You know, you got like 5 to 6 to 7 drops in there, pretty big beefy creatures, so they're going to focus on kind of ramping up their mana base to get those guys out faster.
Hmm. Okay.
Which, yeah.
So we've talked about archetypes, we've talked about theme briefly here. Now, what can our listeners expect coming up in our next episode here?
So following this, we can. Oh, geez, let's see. Well, we can probably go into just diving more into what each of these colors really can be defined as. Because I know, like, so we mentioned these different commanders with different colors and they do different things. But we can probably just go into, like, what they do and what their core mechanics are. Right, so like we have these various archetypes and we have these themes of, like, you know, creature based decks, artifact based decks, the enchantment based deck, you know, things that are like also, you know, you have your aristocrat style, which is sacrificing, but those are like things to build around. But then when you get into the real meat and potatoes of it, really, it's like, what color do you want to play also? You know, and which colors match which play style, really. So I think that that's probably where we're gonna go in our follow up to this.
All right. So, with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Jack and I have thoroughly enjoyed talking our favorite format of
Oh,
Commander
always a
once again
blast.
for another hour here. And we hope that you look forward to our next episode as well. Do us a favor, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram. We have a Twitter that's not really that up yet, but we are on Twitter. And go ahead and share our podcast with anyone that you may know that is interested in this Magic format. We'd be greatly appreciative of it, and we hope that you stay tuned for our future episodes. Thank you, everyone.
Bye bye.